The StoneZONE with legendary Republican strategist and political icon and pundit Roger Stone. Stone has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is a New York Times best-selling author and a longtime friend and advisor of President Donald Trump. As an outspoken libertarian, Stone has appeared on thousands of broadcasts, spoken at countless venues, and lectured before the prestigious Oxford Political Union and the Cambridge Union Society. Due to his 4+ decades in the political and cultural arena, Stone has become a pop culture icon. And now, here's your host, Roger Stone.
Welcome, I'm Roger Stone, and yes, you are back in the Stone Zone. With only weeks to go before the 2024 presidential election, the campaign of Kamala Harris seems to be dealing with problems with what should be, historically, her base. The truth is, there's empirical polling evidence that shows that Donald Trump is making deep inroads into both African American and Hispanic voters who heretofore have been some of the most reliable elements of the Democrat voting coalition. They even had to go to their heaviest surrogate, President Barack Obama, in an effort to shore up their dwindling support among Black male voters. Here to help me break this down is my friend R.C. Maxwell, who's with Turning Point USA. R.C. Maxwell, welcome to the Stone Zone.
Glad to be on. I can't quite get my suspenders to pop like yours.
They look great, though, brother. They look great.
Thank you.
So let's take a look at this. Barack Obama, I found this to be embarrassing, almost pathetic, that a former president in the twilight of his political career is basically reduced to race baiting, which doesn't seem to be going over very well. Let's take a quick look.
And you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. That's not acceptable. That's not, this shouldn't even be a question.
I mean, to me, this has backfired badly. One of the clips I saw had Obama urging Black men to vote for Kamala because he said they had a shared experience and that she'd had to struggle and work harder for what she had achieved. This makes very little sense because most Black men in America weren't born in Canada to wealthy Indian families. But that is the truth of her biography. Yes, there is the troubling issue of her shifting claims of ethnicity for political expediency and benefit, which I think is the most polite way you can take it. But RC, how do you think this is playing with Black voters across the board and Black male voters?
Yeah, I mean, this has backfired immensely. This is a huge embarrassment, not only for Kamala Harris, but mainly for Barack Obama, who, feels like his legacy is kind of on the line here. You said he's been kind of reduced to race baiting. Well, that's not all he's been reduced to, Roger. He, the other day, recorded 21 campaign videos for Kamala Harris. Not even Donald Trump is being put through that kind of rigorous campaigning, 21 videos in a day. So Barack Obama is not acting as some emeritus elder on the sidelines guiding. No, he's a campaign donkey being trotted out by the Democrats to not only save his legacy, but to try to drag Kamala across the finish line. And as you said, it's backfiring immensely. You had Nina Turner, a CNN panelist, kind of eloquently shame Barack Obama for daring to chastise Black men of all demographics who, by the way, are drifting away from Kamala Harris. It's not just Black men. Kamala's performing under Biden in a lot of specific demographics. So it's not just Black men, but Black men are the ones kind of being picked out and picked on, which is kind of a part of the growing trend of straight Black men kind of being chastised by progressives. You've seen this from a famous article years ago from The Root, a famous Black publication that essentially said, I think it was entitled "Black Men are, the next straight white man, essentially, kind of targeting them, saying that they're prone to misogyny and that they need to kind of step up their value system. All of this talk has become toxic, and it's not surprising that even Obama, he's kind of being shown that he's not royalty. Look, the Black community is struggling. You want to know what we're doing at Turning Point Action that's helping get out the Black vote? It's no secret. We're taking a simple little flyer like this that asks, are you better than you were 4 years ago? It has gas prices, rent prices, food prices, simple things like where interest has gone up under Kamala Harris. And this is very persuasive to Black Americans. You can't treat Black Americans like a monolith. Not every Black person, went to college. Not every Black person, has a family. Not every Black person smokes weed. Kamala Harris kind of seems to lump all of them together, and so does Obama. And you're seeing this backfire immensely. And it's now given an opportunity for Republicans to pounce. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing Republicans pounce. Trump just came out with a new ad featuring Charlemagne the God, who's a popular, breakfast club host in the Black community, very well known. And Trump just used an ad using a clip of him being flabbergasted about the fact that Kamala Harris is using tax dollars to fund gender sex change surgeries for prisoners. So these are things that has the Black community shocked. And this is why they say, you know what, I want to return to Trump. They want to be able to, upgrade their home. They want food prices to come down. They want businesses to get back to hiring, and they want to get away from this Democrat LGBTQ public education mindset. It'd be difficult for you or I even to put our finger on exactly what it is that's causing the Black community, in particular Black men, to escape away from the Democrat Party. But it's that attempt actually to try to put your finger on one specific thing that actually has the Black community frustrated. And again, it's not just votes that need to go to Donald Trump. Quite frankly, we just need some of the folks who voted for Biden in 2020 and who voted for Obama in 2016. We just need some of those folks to be willing to even sit on the sidelines. And I think that's what's happening. And that's why Democrats are so scared.
Yeah, the most offensive thing about that Breakfast Club interview was Kamala Harris now suddenly saying she wants to legalize weed for the brothers. Well, first of all, it's insulting to believe that every Black person in the country smokes marijuana. Secondarily, Donald Trump had endorsed Amendment 3 here in Florida, which would legalize cannabis for two reasons. One, because a lot of people he knows, older Americans, depend on it for medicinal purposes. And Florida's medicinal marijuana system, which was originally approved through constitutional amendment, but then implemented by a hostile Republican legislature and governor, has created a system that is expensive, cumbersome, bureaucratic, and extremely limited. So cannabis for medicinal purposes is only available for a very limited number of illnesses specified in the program to administer it. So, for example, if you're dealing with depression or if you have a bad back, both of which I think cannabis is safer than opioid-based drugs, you can't get that through the Florida system. So President Trump has endorsed Amendment 3, which will legalize, also regulate cannabis in the state of Florida. Another way to make sure, by the way, that the cannabis is not sprayed or containing fentanyl. And so it's no longer a crime federally, but not a crime here. The point, of course, is that Kamala Harris has never in her career done anything towards the legalization of cannabis. She joked, as you know, about smoking marijuana when she was in college, said she was listening to Biggie and Tupac, but if you check, they were unheard of at that point, hadn't recorded anything. And then, of course, she prosecuted 1,900 people, overwhelmingly people of color, for the first time nonviolent crime of possession of small amounts of marijuana for personal use. People who belonged in drug treatment programs, not in jail. So her entire record on this issue She's late to the party to begin with. And secondarily, I think it is insulting to assume that this is a driving issue. I think you put it best. Black voters want the same thing that all voters want: economic opportunity, affordable housing, low gas prices, low grocery prices, educational opportunity, quality schools, and above all, safe neighborhoods. This idea that they want something different than all Americans, I think that idea in itself is racist. And then there's the question of Kamala's record as a prosecutor. I just pointed out that the way she prosecuted people for doing exactly what she said she did, smoking marijuana. But this powerful new documentary regarding her abuse of a Black woman named Charee Peoples and her daughter is really something else. Let's roll the trailer for that.
I intend to fight for Black Lives Matters. I intend to fight.
If Black Lives matter to her, why didn't I matter?
Because of truancy, California public schools lose $1.4 billion a year in funding.
I want money.
I don't agree what Kamala Harris did to my mom.
So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy.
And I spent a majority of my time here at the hospital.
When Kamala Harris was the California Attorney General, she had me arrested and prosecuted because my handicapped daughter was sick in the hospital and had missed some days of school.
I have sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is a hereditary disease, and it is very, very painful.
In 2012, like all California parents, I received a threatening letter from Kamala Harris saying, "We'll go to jail for a year if our kids even miss 10% of school days." Little did I know, there was a warrant out for my arrest. All of a sudden, the police is outside my house, and they started banging on the door. They told me I was under arrest for my child missing school. I was shocked. I said, "But my baby is sick. The school knows that." And they said, "Go talk to Kamala Harris. Place your hands behind your back."
My mom did nothing wrong. We did everything we were supposed to. I was always bringing doctor's notes, always calling the school to let them know that I was in the hospital.
But my hell was just beginning. They gave me 2 charges. I spent the next 2 years in court fighting these charges. Kamala assigned her nastiest prosecutors to my case.
My homicide prosecutors, my gang prosecutors. And they went over there and I said, "When you go over there, look really mean."
All the time I had to spend going to court, I was struggling to care for my Shayla.
We are going to make sure that you face the full force and consequences of the law.
I lost my job and couldn't pay rent, and we got evicted. I became homeless. We had to move into a motel.
And I ended up being in the hospital a lot during her trial. And in that hospital stay was when I had my stroke.
I had a stroke about 4 or 5 days ago, and right now I'm doing pretty good. My hand is doing okay, I guess.
Let's be clear, my values have not changed.
Look, I am not a political person, but I want people to know what Kamala Harris has did to me. If she do it to me, she will abuse anyone if you give her the power.
The truancy program got a lot of criticism too. Did you actually lock anybody up?
No, we never locked anybody up. We did prosecute some cases, but far few, only about 20.
My message to all Americans, especially Black Americans, do not trust Kamala Harris.
Wow.
RC, had you seen that before?
No, I saw reports about this truancy issue. Obviously I'm from California. I'm from Inglewood, the last Black enclave in California. But I hadn't saw that interview in quite depth. And it definitely just goes to show you that Kamala Harris, from the start, was using her attorney general's office not to run the office as she should to the benefit of citizens of California, but she was running it in hindsight, thinking about how she could elevate her political career. Just as when she was in the district attorney's office, she was always looking for the next job. That's why she had a very poor reputation in the district attorney's office before she ran for AG. This is Kamala Harris. She is a political opportunist. And I think that's great that you brought up how President Trump was actually the first to support cannabis legalization. He made lots of comments about its positive economic benefits at large. He made lots of comments about the tax benefits and how it could fund public education. You just pointed to some of the medical benefits, but now Kamala, obviously, in a desperate plea for votes, has shamefully lumped this into like a Black policy. There's nothing specific that necessarily you need to mention Black people in this issue, unless you're, of course, citing data and you're talking about criminalization and how, generally Black Americans are suffering from marijuana penalties than other Americans are. But that's not what Kamala's mentioning. She's saying this is going to be a financial success story for Black Americans, kind of, bringing up images of Jay-Z on the corner, making money from selling weed. Does she expect people like me to all of a sudden to say, you know what, I'm going to open up a weed shop because weed is now federally legal? It's very offensive from Kamala Harris, and it just kind of goes to show you how much of a political opportunist she is, not supporting cannabis legalization for the reasons Donald Trump is, the tax benefits, the economic benefits, the pragmatic thinking. No, she is using this as a caricature against Black men, and she's going to find out overwhelmingly a lot of Black men are very anti-weed. Sure, there may be a lot of criminalizations from the same population, the same group of Black people reoffending, but there's a lot of people like my dad, people in my family, they hate pot. They hate when certain relatives come back from Thanksgiving at that hour, smelling like the good stuff, for lack of a better term. So they're going to find out that Black Americans aren't a monolith. And I tell you, Roger, this is going to be embarrassing. When we look back at this election in hindsight, you think of Mitt Romney and his binders full of women. You think of, certain moments in presidential history where an election was lost. And you're going to look at Barack Obama being trotted out on the campaign trail, shaming Black men, and then Kamala coming out with a policy of weed legalization a few days later in a lazy attempt to captivate Black voters. We're going to look back at this and say, you know what? This is the moment where we should have knew and should have saw that the wheels were falling off. And according to the poly market, the political betting market, the wheels are falling off.
I guess 2 points. First of all, not only has Trump come out in favor of Amendment 3, which is legalization of cannabis with regulation in Florida, but he also signed into law amendments to the Farm Bill, which legalized the hemp industry, which is a $345 billion industry, which has created tens of thousands of jobs. Hemp can be used to make all kinds of things, fabric, cement, as well as being used recreationally. This is something else I think, frankly, he doesn't get credit for, the enormous economic benefits. Now, the previous high water mark among Black Americans in a presidential race, interestingly enough, is held by Richard Nixon in 1960. Despite the fact that I think Nixon fumbled the arrest of Dr. Martin Luther King in Alabama, and declined to get involved in that case. He felt as a lawyer that would have been inappropriate. Jack Kennedy had his brother Robert Kennedy call the judge in Alabama and urge him to release Dr. King. When that happened, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., who was a Republican and a supporter of Vice President Nixon, switched his support to John Kennedy. And despite all of that, Richard Nixon got about a third of the African-American vote in 1960, a previous high watermark. If you were looking at the polls and everything where do you think, as of today, and I recognize we still have several weeks to go, but where do you think President Trump ends up among African-Americans?
Well, look, you're mentioning a high figure there, 33%, to get 15%, 16% would be huge and would certainly be devastating. But I believe that the ceiling is actually a little bit higher for that. I think President Trump can actually capture 25% of the black vote, which would be huge. And that's certainly the goal. When you look at the data from even the NAACP, they're finding that, 1 in 4 individuals who are African American are leaning toward Donald Trump. When you look at the at-large, the data, almost nearly 50% of young African Americans actually support President Trump. There's an article in NPR that I was actually involved in. It was from August, where it's a huge data breakdown of black voters. I urge everyone to check that out so they can kind of really understand the interesting metrics here for African American voters. Just consider, for example, if you look at any other demographic and you look at their old voters and their young voters, the old voters are going to tend to be more conservative and the young voters are going to lean left. This is only inverted when you look at African American voters. The older voters tend to more lean Democrat and the younger voters are leaning toward Trump. That's huge. That's bad news for Democrats. That means that their base is dying out, literally. And that means that, they're not doing anything to captivate young voters, because young voters who are critical thinkers, they're really kind of analyzing, why would we reward political ineptitude with our vote? So I really think that 25% is a realistic goal. And we're doing all we can at Turning Point Action. And I know some of our sister organizations, like the Pennsylvania Chase and Early Vote Action, America First Works, they're doing the same and work in states like Georgia, Pennsylvania. We're in Philly, we're in Pittsburgh, we're in Milwaukee, getting out the black vote. And the returns are very, very positive. Some of the few hesitations out there, they're largely symbolic. They're largely, some anecdote story. They heard something about Trump and the Central Park Five, and, there's going to be those few pockets, in which case they're surprised to learn the facts when I talk to them about this and say, hey, everyone, thought these kids were guilty. And these kids were actually known for doing a lot of bad things in the park. They weren't completely, innocent kids. I talk about that with parents. And they say, oh, okay, I need to look into that. So you have to understand there's a lot of misinformation still within the black community. A lot of black voters still actually might believe the hoax of Donald Trump said racists were very fine people, the hoax that the media has continued to spread, despite the fact that even fact checks have proved that that's not what he said. But this is the work that needs to be done. And for the first time, we really have that substantial ground game. So I'm feeling really good about where we are. And I think Democrats are definitely panicking. That's why you're seeing this desperation plea from Kamala Harris. And you're going to certainly see more. You're going to see more black swan events from the media, focusing on one small story. They may try to send a black agitator to a Trump rally to get assaulted. Seriously, you never know what's going to happen because Democrats are that desperate, and they recognize that, like I said on this pamphlet, Black Americans, they want things to change, just like all other demographics.
Well, as you know, deeds are far more important than words. It was Joe Biden who wrote the 1994 crime bill. Prior to that, the war on drugs, as begun by President Richard Nixon, was focused on drug traffickers, drug cartels, drug dealers. But the bill written by Judiciary Committee Chairman Joe Biden and signed into law by Bill Clinton, which required the harsh mandatory penalties for the first-time nonviolent crime of possession, was done under Democrats. Now, President Donald Trump has addressed that. The first significant real criminal justice reform, where criminal justice has fallen disproportionately and unfairly on Black Americans, is, of course, the First Step Act, followed up by the Second Chance Act. Joe Biden made an announcement that he was going to treat those who were in jail for drug-related crimes differently, but literally not a single person was released from jail because, well, nobody fit that category. It was a press release. Donald Trump has delivered real criminal justice reform. I'd like to see him talk about that, frankly. I'd like to see the campaign do some urban radio, because I think a lot of voters don't know about that. The other point I would make is that in 2020, President Trump produced what he calls his Platinum Plan. This was a plan for Black empowerment. This was a plan for Black capitalism. It's based on what we talked about earlier, that Black voters, they want a piece of the American dream. They don't want to just be employees. They want to be employers. They want economic opportunity, and Donald Trump has a good plan to give it to them. This is something else I think we need to highlight that I think is vitally important for Black voters to know. And then, of course, I am a little surprised. Reports this morning, early voting in Georgia, voting among Black women is up based on a comparison in this same time period, almost 248%. Not sure what that means. I do think that this idea that all Black women are for Kamala Harris is not true. Anybody who's seen that documentary we just showed you, I think, would have a second thoughts. Why don't we wrap this up by saying also that we here at StoneZONE certainly appreciate the great work that Turning Point is doing, along with Cliff Maloney and the Pennsylvania Chase and all of those sister organizations who are on the ground in all of these swing states, not only registering people, but now making sure that those who have been registered vote. Tell us just quickly what Turning Point is doing in this area.
Yeah, we're certainly trying to convince everyone to vote early. You know, this is something that we haven't necessarily pushed in the past. We've always been proud of the fact that we swamped Democrats on election day, but we now know that local Democrat election officials will let a pipe burst, or they'll let long lines take up and, you know, cause people to get out of lines. We don't want to risk that. So the messaging has changed. We're engaging voters multiple times, multiple touch points. And we're also specifically targeting, you know, some of the hardest voters to reach, you know, the people who usually stay on the sidelines, people who's missed a couple of elections, either a primary or a general. You know, we're really talking to those folks, and we're just really having a really intense ground game in these states. Another thing I'd like to add in terms of President Trump's successes, though, to the Black community was opportunity zones. President Trump gave Cory Booker and a lot of Democrat senators what they were angling for years, which is the creations of tax liabilities, tax benefits for investments into opportunity zones, zones that were deemed as ineffective, low producing, struggling. And a lot of those zones were black areas, and they got a lot of tax benefits for investment in those communities. That was a success that President Trump also actually passed. So part of his Platinum Plan was to expand upon that, which would have been a huge bust for some of the communities that you currently see struggling. So a turning point is we have a lot of people who know these stats and are essentially engaging with voters. And look, you know, there were a lot of people for whatever reason, they were turned off in 2020, you know, a lot of very elderly people, you know, maybe people who thought President Trump were toxic. Those are the people that we've been focusing on, and we have been winning bigly. And that's why Democrats are scared. They can pay for all the ads that they want. They're not going to change the minds of people who, once again, just want these core issues: gas, food, eggs to be low.
All right, we have to leave it there. I want to thank my guest, R.C. Maxwell, for joining us today in the Stone Zone. And my friend, you have an open invitation to come back anytime. God bless you.
Thank you, Roger.
All right, folks, you may have seen this, or maybe you didn't, but I spoke to the Jacksonville Young Republicans about a month ago. And in my remarks, I said I believed that there were as many as 1 million non-existent voters on the voting rolls in swing states. These would be voters who have died, voters who have moved out of state, or voters that never actually existed to begin with. People registered to post office boxes, which is normally illegal. People registered to vacant lots, undeveloped land, or people registered to non-residential buildings. People who, when they're mailed, they come back, those mailings come back addressee unknown and undeliverable. I was immediately attacked for seeking to disenfranchise 1 million voters, which of course is not even remotely what I said. Joining me now is a man who's an expert on the voter rolls and a major activist in the area of election integrity. Chris Jersky of the People's Audit joins us now in the Stone Zone. Chris.
Thanks for having me back, Mr. Stone. How's it going today?
I am so glad to have you back. Look, I think you're a brilliant guy. You're a techie, which I'm not. I can barely operate my cell phone. You have a really superior understanding of the technology necessary to analyze these voter files, which of course are public records. So talk to us about, first of all, how many non-existent voters you think are on the rolls in these swing states, and what is being done quite legally and technically to ensure that the voter rolls are clean and that only people who are actually eligible to vote are able to vote.
Well, starting back about 3 months, a troubling pattern started to happen in all the states that we were monitoring. Specifically, Florida was the one that we touted the most because we cleaned off about 1.2 million people out of that. I believe 1 million of that was around, or just under 1 million was Democrats, and 250,000 of that was NPAs. And that was specifically honing in on just bad addresses. We didn't go after parties. We just wanted the addresses to be proved as valid. And that's what resulted in that cleaning. But about 3 months back, we saw an turning where we just started seeing huge volumes of new voters being added back into the voter rolls. And they have suspicious activity, both with bad addresses as well as older registration dates. So for example, somebody might have came back in August with a 1992 registration date. And because we have about 28 months worth of data in Florida, we're able to see that these people come back just for elections, and then they get removed shortly after an election. So we have some examples that they were voting in primaries as well as the general, and being deleted. They're added maybe 2 months or the month of, and then they're deleted either the month of or the month after.
Now, when you get this data, what do you do with it?
Specifically, we're just taking every month and we're comparing it to the previous month and watching for what's changed. So we're specifically looking to see what new voters weren't on the voter rolls the previous month per the public data. And that will give a specific report that'll tell us exactly if that voter existed. Plus, because we have all of this data on hand for multiple states, we could literally show in our reports if this person was on the voter rolls and when. So if somebody was normally registered, you would assume that they were just on the voter rolls every month going forward through the elections and even afterwards. But we see this troubling pattern where some of the older registrations were like they registered in 1992. That means that these people should be on the voter rolls consistently every month. But in fact, they're basically being added 2 months before the election. And the thing that's very scary about that is if an official is looking at this data, they'll never pick up on that, because to them, they'll just appear as an older voter because they have an older registration date. The state doesn't do anything like we do with these audits to check to see what's actually being injected into the voter rolls every month.
So once you have that information, do you approach the election boards with it? Do you file a legal action? How do you stop people who aren't really eligible to vote from voting?
It's a complicated process, and really we want to hear the locals' response to this first. In weird cases, you might have unprotected voters, protected voters, people that are sheriffs, judges, attorney generals, maybe, that might be unshielded and coming back on the voter rolls. So there might be some excuses for it happening. And of course, we don't want to ruin any privacy or as well as bring any attention to these possibilities of happening. So first thing is we go forward into the locals, and we have our local teams and the counties and basically approach them to make sure that that is a legitimate ad. And first of all, the locals should know it's happening because it's happening behind their back in some cases. So that's a complicated process, and that takes a while because they want to investigate it and see what exactly is happening there. We have a couple states that are looking into the ones that we found so far. And then the next thing is if they can't explain it, then we don't get a response back, then we try to make that public, which we're probably going to be making public, the ones in North Carolina and Georgia here shortly, because there's absolutely no response to anything that we've brought forward in those two states. Troubling thing about North Carolina is that storm that just impacted there, we just saw huge amounts of voters being added in the last 3 months in North Carolina. It doesn't make any sense. 250 or 245,000 people were added, and the majority of that came in June. So just since June, 90% of those voters have been added.
That is really extraordinary. So I'm sure you have followed events here in Virginia, where the governor issued an executive order saying that people who are not citizens and therefore are not eligible to vote should not be allowed to vote. And this is not some new policy, as the governor's pointed out. That has been the policy of the state of Virginia, and the state has tried to purge such non-eligible voters from the rolls. Now the Department of Justice is suing the state of Virginia, saying that these questionable registrants are being removed from the rolls too close to an election. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how they justify wanting to keep people who aren't eligible on the rolls. What's your thinking on this, Chris?
It's a big finger pointing game as far as I can see so far. We've brought this up multiple times in Florida to Court Byrd for over 2 years now, and it's been ignored. And then now all of a sudden, close to the election, they act like there's nothing they can do. It boggles my mind because my own wife is Venezuelan, and we went through the green card process when we got married back in 1999. And I myself saw them push the registration application over to her just after they just got done seeing her green card and giving her a driver's license with all of her valid forms of new ID. And I asked them at that point, like, why are you even asking her to register if you know for a fact she's not a citizen? So everybody has that capability of checking these things at a local level. It boggles my mind for the excuse of, oh, well, we have to check with DHS. They're sitting there right in front of you with a ID. If they're showing you a green card as their proof of identity, they're obviously not a citizen. And then later they'll be naturalized. I went through that process as well, where after my wife was naturalized, we brought her paperwork in, and then we got her registered with proof of citizenship. So the states have full capability of watching for this. But then you have the situation like you saw here in Virginia, and I think Alabama as well, where now the federal government is coming down and cracking down on removing people. So first, how did these people get on the voter rolls to begin with if our processes were correct? And then B, why is the federal government now basically coming down and saying you can't remove them? It's a big, like that Spider-Man meme where they're like pointing the fingers at each other, trying to blame each other. But in reality, they're both culpable.
Yeah, the other one that surprises me here is Arizona, where we seem to be fighting over I think it's 218,000 known illegals that are on their state voting list. The Secretary of State is fighting to leave them on the list so they're eligible to vote. It really boggles the mind that they keep, first of all, they imply that we're trying to disenfranchise legitimate voters. Not our intention, not what we're trying to do, not what we're advocating in the slightest. The idea, you know this, that Florida has the gold standard in terms of clean elections is simply not true based on the actual voter files. When I went to vote in the last election, there was a short line. I voted on election day, and the man in front of me presented his ID, and he was told that he had already voted, but he hadn't voted. And he was curious. Let's say his name was Joe Brown. And he said, let me ask a question, he said to the nice lady working there. He said, do you have an Alma Brown registered at the same address? And she said, oh, yes, she voted this morning as well. Well, he said, gee, that's my mother. She's been dead for 12 years. The idea that Florida has the cleanest, pristine election mechanism and voter rolls is simply not true. You have worked tirelessly, along with the great folks at the Florida Republican Assembly, to get fairer, more honest, more transparent elections here in the Sunshine State. But you're also very active in several other states. I know you've been very active in Texas. Tell us where else the People's Audit is working.
Currently, we went very deep into North Carolina and Georgia, as well as Texas. We have a great team on the ground in Texas that really has been taking the ball by themselves. But because of how important Georgia and North Carolina is, we really went deeper into mail-in ballots, trying to understand process, as well as building out all kinds of things to monitor that coming into this next election. But right now, once we have all these things up, we're going to be rolling out these other states as well. The software is done. It's just a matter of standing up the states. But the real time that we took into the last 3 months was looking into mail-in ballots, because it's just, that is, like you just mentioned, how are they getting these people to vote if they're dead? The only way they can do it is through mail. And if you looked at, generally speaking, like if this was a business, somebody would be getting arrested, because there's so many loopholes and such a lack of due diligence on anything when it comes to mail-in ballots. That is where the majority of the fraud is happening. I feel like they're just basically stealing people's identities, that they watch over and see that, oh, this is a low active voter that might just be inspired now because of Trump and want to come out and vote. And then they find out they already have voted. And then the state's response to that is to pat them on the head and give them a provisional ballot. And we've looked into the provisional ballot situation. There is 0 logs on the reason you're getting a provisional ballot. There's no follow-up. They never call you back up and say that they've rectified the issue or anything. It's just literally a part of the Steele process, where I really feel that they just did that just to basically give somebody to fill out, so they don't go out and fill out a police report. My personal opinion, they should be calling the non-emergency number at the polling station and asking to file a police report for stolen identities. We've asked our local sheriffs, they agree with that. And that would be at least some kind of outside source where we could now track police reports for people's identities being stolen. Because every time after the election, we ask how many provisional ballots were filled out for that particular case you just mentioned. And they're like, none, because they don't have any distinction. They just say, we have 20 provisional ballots at this precinct, but there's no reason of why they got a provisional ballot.
Well, and as you know, here in the state of Florida, thanks to a series of so-called election law reforms supported by Republicans in the legislature and signed into law by Governor DeSantis, the process is actually more opaque than it was. It's a felony to harass an election official, but the problem with that is asking simple questions, maybe asking the same question twice, is suddenly defined as harassment. Also, elections can only be challenged by election board members. They can't be challenged by average citizens. So these election reforms put in place in the Sunshine State have not been helpful. I know we only have you for a few more minutes, Chris. I appreciate you jumping in here at late notice. The Democrats seem to have mounted this enormous effort to register people who are out of the country without, again, checking for any proof of citizenship. What do you think of this, and what kind of impact do you think it's going to have?
It keeps on getting worse every time we look at it. In 2020, it definitely exploded. But as I lump this all together with mail, it's basically just another form of the abuse in the mail-in ballots. The Yuba Kaibo votes, which you're referring to, the out-of-state international people, they don't have to do anything but go to a website and fill out a form saying that they lived previously at an address. I always thought that it was residency. I myself have friends that are expatriates and they haven't been in the country for 4 or 5 years at a time. But the thing is like, why are they allowed to vote in a local race if they're not participating, they're not living, they're not residents there anymore? It just boggles my mind. Military is a perfect example of people that are protected and they're allowed to vote because they're out on deployment and they have a reason for being out of state, and that's most of the time it's involuntary. But the big thing about these international folks, they've now chosen to live overseas. They're essentially, that's their residency. I have no idea why they're asking for mail-in ballots. And more importantly, what we found in this Ubicaibo system is because when we watch it over time through the election, you can literally see the address change at the last minute right for the election. So for example, I had one example where someone requested a ballot in China. I believe it was for the 2022 election primary. And they shown as voting through the Ubicaibo system in China. And then right before the election, their address flipped back to being a city in Florida. So it's like if you're looking at the final result, they look like they're voting from the state, when in fact, if you're watching over time, these are Ubicaibo votes that the people are abusing. That system has hardly any checks and balances on identity. You just have to fill out an online form and you send in an email or a fax to represent your vote. And you can imagine how that can get abused if there's no checks on identity, or as well as basically if that person really is a citizen or not.
Last time I was in Nevada, just before an election, a man came up to me after I spoke, and he had 5 ballots. They were all addressed to the same address, but to 5 different people. I said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, one of them is addressed to me. I'm registered at that address. The other 4 are people who lived in my apartment before me. One of them lived there 15 years ago." I've tried to look up these names. I don't think any of these people still live in the state of Nevada, or perhaps they're not still living. If I were dishonest, I could mail in all of these votes, but I'm not even going to use my own mail in. I'm going to go vote in person. Deeply disturbing to me when you look at the polls, Donald Trump holding a very narrow but appears to be growing lead in the Silver State. Yet this is a state that automatically mails a ballot to every voter on the rolls, whether they have requested a mail-in ballot or not. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Give us a few seconds on that. And then, Chris, tell us how folks can support your important work at the People's Audit.
Thank you. The point about what you're saying about sending, that is the biggest travesty I've seen. And that's probably the biggest red flag that you have a problem with voter fraud in your state. The fact that they're just sending out ballots to anybody that doesn't request them, that tells you right away that A, people might have moved away, information changes. We all know that the voter rolls are dirty. This will immediately cause a wave of undeliverable ballots. And most importantly about that, there's software that the printers use, like Runback and some of these other big printers, Cathedral that's here in Florida, and I believe Texas just recently moved their printing to Texas, or to New York actually. So these printers, they're dealing with this bulk ad. Like for example, Florida might have about 3 million ballots that it mails out at the beginning of the general election. The printers are the first people in the line of this chain of custody that actually know who moved away, because there's a piece of software that's required when they go to fill out the postage that tells them that this person moved out. That's a normal piece of software that they use to save on postage normally, but the law requires all ballots be mailed out. But now you're communicating to a large printer that has the capability of being able to print and mail in ballots in mass. You could literally deliver, like we had in that case in I think Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, where they trucked in like 100 some odd or 200 some thousand ballots. That's where these things come into play. They can start stealing in mass. So when they start printing and sending everything out, we all know people move, things change, people die. There should be a cleanup process at the minimum every 2 years. But it should really be that you request it for every election if you want to be able to keep mail-in ballots. As far as I'm concerned, all mail-in ballots are subject to fraud. I would like to do away with them, except for in the cases of like military and first responders, people that have an excuse to vote absentee, the original absentee ballot. But as far as myself,
Go ahead.
Oh, but as far as myself, if you want to learn more about what we do, the best place to go is the peoplesaudit.org. Altogether, thepeoplesaudit.org. And that website will have links to my social media, as well as the ability to donate. If you feel moved by this, I'd appreciate donations, because we have dedicated 100% of my business resources to doing all of this for the last 4 years.
All right. I want to thank our guest, Chris Jersky's doing yeoman service here to make sure we have free, fair, honest, transparent elections. Chris, I want to thank you for jumping in here at the last minute. I think our audience appreciates it. We learned a lot today. God bless you, my friend, and continue the fight.
Yeah, bless you too, sir. Thank you very much.
Folks, if you were in the path of this hurricane, or if you thought you might have been, I hope you thought about how you would have communicated when the cell phone towers went down, when the electricity went down. I feel for those people in Western North Carolina. 29 out of 100 counties were affected, and many of them still do not have power. I hope, therefore, you would consider doing what I did. I realized when AT&T had an outage that our cell phone system is extremely vulnerable. So I went and got the Iridium 9555 phone, and I signed up for the Iridium satellite cell service. Let's take a look.
This is Roger Stone. Remember when AT&T's cell phone outage left millions, including me, stranded without a means to communicate with loved ones, business associates, or even for emergency services? You see, cellular networks are particularly vulnerable, big targets for hackers and terrorists, as well as vulnerable to hurricanes and other natural disasters. So if your cell phone goes down, how will you communicate? That's why I got the Iridium 9555 satellite phone and service. I'm using the proprietary Iridium satellite service. Cell networks only cover about 7% of the Earth, while the Iridium system covers 100% of the Earth. You can call or text from any place you can see the sky. These are trusted by U.S. military and government officials everywhere. All calls are encrypted, safe and secure. No eavesdropping, no hacking. It's the reason the U.S. military uses Iridium phones, and the U.S. Senate uses satellite phones for their secure phone calls. You too can ensure your privacy by using our Iridium proprietary satellite network. Just go to sat123.com/Roger. No tracking and no one can listen to your calls. No one will ever read your text but the person you're sending them to. And more importantly, big tech cannot steal and then sell your data. You can get the Iridium 9555 phone at no cost if you sign up for a plan with a 24-month agreement. A monthly plan is only $95.95, and you get the phone for free. You can get a plan with us for as little as $85.95. And then there are discounted family share plans with up to 3 free phones. Those are also available. The Iridium 9555 satellite phone will work from anywhere on Earth with no exceptions. Oh, and how do you keep your satellite phone charged in the event of an electrical grid shutdown? You're going to want our solar-powered satellite phone recharger. You can get it all by going to sat123.com/Roger. You need to have secure communications. Get your Iridium 9555 phone now.
There you have it, folks. I hope you will check it out. I depend on my Iridium 955 phone every single day. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to see us every day here on the Stone Zone. Obviously, you can go to World View Tube at 4 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Eastern, and you can see the Stone Zone where we eat, sleep, and breathe politics. But if you don't catch it there, well, you can catch us at Rumble. So please go to rumble.com and sign up. You can follow us at rumble.com/RogerStone, rumble.com/RogerStone. You see the follow button there. You click on that and then set a notification for yourself so that you are reminded every day that you can see our show, usually at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 days a week. Also want to remind you that every Sunday, I'm on WABC, 77 WABC radio, the largest, most powerful, and most influential AM radio station in America. That's from 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern every Sunday afternoon. Doesn't matter where you are in the country, you can listen live by going to WABCRadio.com. That's WABCRadio.com. I recommend you download the 77 WABC Radio app, or if you live in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, you can go to 770 on the AM dial. Don't miss it. Every Sunday, we talk politics, style, food, fashion, culture, history. It's a pretty broad program, but it's 3 full hours. We bring you extraordinary interviews. This weekend, Colonel Douglas McGregor joins us to talk about whether the country is hurtling towards World War III. Our other guests will be announced shortly. And lastly, let me remind you that among our most important sponsors are our good friends over at MyPillow.com. MyPillow.com is, of course, run by that great American patriot, Mike Lindell, the #1 advocate for free speech and election integrity in the country today. Because Mike is a patriot and a supporter of President Trump, he too is under attack. So this is a twofer, maybe even a threefer, by going to mypillow.com and using promo code STONE. You can help us here at the Stone Zone. Mrs. Stone will be very happy. Her birthday is actually tomorrow. You can also help Mike Lindell and the folks at MyPillow, and you can get extraordinary products. I recommend the dog beds, the pet blankets, the uber absorbent bath and shower towels, the luxurious bed sheets, but there are many, many great products at mypillow.com. Be sure to use promo code STONE when you go there. That's it for us today, folks. I want to thank you. Our audience is growing here on the Stone Zone. Also want to put in a word of apology from my regular co-host, Troy Smith. He'll be back with us tomorrow. He, of course, is the editor of slingshot.news. You can go there to subscribe for free. Or you can also go to StoneZONE.com. You see it right there on the screen, StoneZONE.com. We put all our videos up there, as well as all of our print journalism and important stories that we think you may have missed. So check that out as well, StoneZONE.com. So on behalf of everybody here at the Stone Zone, we thank you for joining us and say until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?